Good afternoon. We are so excited that you are joining us today for the 2020 C3E Symposium. We're delighted to have you with us, and especially for this, the first panel of today. My name is Maria Vargas. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Energy. I work in the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and I am excited to be the moderator for today's panel, Framing the Issues, Clean Energy Challenges and Opportunities Today and Tomorrow. Before we get started, we as a panel are committed to making this interactive, fun, and engaging with you, the audience. So before we get started, I'd like you as the audience to take some polling questions for us to help us know who's in our audience today. So you can either do it by going to slido.com or you can submit your answers on the bottom of the screen. There's a place for you to submit your answers. So there's just a couple questions we have for you today. Again, just really to get a feel for who's with us and who's joining the conversation today. We're curious how long you've been in the clean energy space. Are you in the public, nonprofit, or private world? And then really, because we're going to see how well your opinions match those of today's panelists, what do you think the biggest challenge or one of the biggest challenges in clean energy will be in the next 5 years? There's a 25 character limit, so you can't add too much, but please do tell us what you think the biggest challenge will be in the next 5 years in the clean energy space. So again, we are pleased to have you here with us today as part of this panel discussion. And today's session is really designed to focus on the clean energy landscape, how we're going to boldly move forward with the energy transition and the implications for ongoing efforts to address climate change and sustainability. And I'm thrilled that on today's panel, we have 3 thought leaders in this space. What's going to be fun about this panel is that these 3 women come from very different backgrounds. They work on very different parts of this opportunity and will bring 3 very different perspectives and work experiences to bear. The way today will work is I've asked each panelist to spend up to 10 minutes giving you their perspective, and then we'll go to some Q&A. Now, let me just tell you, these panelists could spend all day talking to you given the experience they have in the space. But in order to make this a little bit more focused, I've asked each panelist to talk about 3 opportunities that they're excited about in the future, and then 1 challenge that they see in coming up in the future. So before I go to, well, let me do this. I'm going to introduce the panelists right now, and then I will tell them and share with all of you some of what we're seeing in terms of the answers we've gotten to the polls today. So our 3 panelists are first Colette Honorable will speak to us. Colette is a partner at the global law firm of Reid Smith, where she leads the clean energy practice and the energy regulatory practice. She was a commissioner at FERC from 2015 to 2017, and among her jobs, she has also been the past president of NARUC. Our next panelist will be Jessika Trancik. Jessica is the Associate Professor for the Institute for Data Systems and Society at MIT. And Jessica's projects focus on all energy services, including energy, transportation, heating, and industrial processes. We're excited to have Jessika speak to us second. And then third, we've asked Sue Reid to join our panel. Sue leads Mission 2020's work to move the global finance sector into alignment with the Paris Agreement's objectives. And she has 20 years of experience being an advocate for clean energy, energy policies, practices, and investment. So with that, I'm just going to look at the poll and see if we can see some of the answers and what we got from you. So let me just look here. All right, I am trying to do that. Let's see. All right. Let's see. So maybe if Kelly can help me and add those to the chat function, that would be great because I am unable to see that. So thank you so much, Kelly. So here's what you all have told us. About 30% of our audience has been in clean energy for less than 5 years. About 40%, 5 to 15 years. More than 15 years is not 19%, roughly 20%, and not in clean energy. Thank you for adding that, folks who added to the poll, about 10%. And then our audience is about 35% public, about half in the private sector, and about 20% in nonprofit. So that is really interesting feedback to let us know who they are. So panelists, that's who's in our audience today. Colette, I'm going to ask you to go first, and then I'm going to come back after your remarks real quickly, and we'll just talk about what people are telling us they think their biggest challenges are, and we'll see how well they matched you. Or maybe I'll do it after all three of you. So with that, Colette, I'm going to turn it over to you to kick us off and give us your perspective on the clean energy landscape and what we'll need to do, 3 opportunities moving forward and a challenge that you see on the horizon. With that, Colette, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Maria. And first, let me thank and congratulate C3E on another incredible symposium. And I want to acknowledge certainly DOE, MIT, Mighty, and it's really an honor to have been an ambassador for a number of years, but we work hard, and it's a labor of love. And it's a bummer that we can't all be together this year, but I have to say the ambassadors are carrying on a lively chat in LinkedIn. So you guys, I'll have to catch up when I get done with this session. I want to congratulate the honorees and Bobby, Lifetime Achievement. You guys are so inspiring. And I also want to reflect upon, Maria, very quickly, the polling questions. I love that 30% of the attendees and participants today have been involved in clean energy for less than 5 years, because we need new perspectives. We need that energy. We're also rounded out nicely with the mid-level folks, the folks that we honor and recognize at 41%, and the kind of the OGs in the space at more than 15 years. That's wonderful too. I love the folks that aren't in clean energy as well, because we hope to inform you about our work and what you can do to support the clean energy transition. I wanted to focus on policy development for my time today with you in the next 8.5 minutes, really focusing on 3 key opportunities in the sector and also a big challenge, and it's a looming one that we've been grappling with in my former nearly 10 years as an energy regulator. Yes, I said the R word, your friend, the former regulator. But really the regulatory role is a critical one as we are embarking upon a really new and revived effort in this space. I feel so much energy in this clean energy transition right now. It's been the craziest of years with the pandemic and crazy economic times, racial unrest around the world, etc. But I also feel hope, and I think you've heard that today throughout the symposium, a number of individuals who are reinvigorated at this time, particularly in the US. But I have to tell you, I hear about this all over the world, most recently with our friends in Greece due to a State Department partnership that I enjoy. Let me get to my task at hand, policy development. We have 3 critical opportunities in the clean energy space that are owing right smack where policy development and implementation resides. We can have all of the scientific discoveries and deployments, all of the build out, but if we don't have strong policy that is removing barriers to entry and, more importantly, spurring the integration of clean energy, we really won't be able to harness this time as much as we could. I want to focus right now on infrastructure. So I'm really delighted to see 48% of the folks in the public or in the private sector, 36% in the public sector. You guys are really critical to this work coming about. We have had some, I'll admit it, some challenging times with transmission development, not only at the local state level, but more importantly at the regional level, at the wholesale level. So this is really a time for us to kind of step back now, reassess, for instance, at FERC and in the regional transmission organizations and independent system operators, what is working well with Order 1000, more importantly, what's not working well, and to really be honest about how we can retool that now with the new energy that we'll have here in the US and the new focus on building back better. That's a critical role that we can play together. We can also focus on interregional projects. We've been really stumbling with high voltage transmission lines in the US. And that's a critical opportunity for us to deploy greater amounts of renewables, which are so plentiful, really competitive economically, and really strongly supporting the clean energy transition. So we've got to really focus on the hard stuff, not just the easy lines. We've got to focus on those tough interregional lines to help us make this critical transition. Battery storage is an area that I call, we're kind of passing the baton from leadership to leadership. During my time at FERC, we were delighted to stand up the energy storage policy statement, also delighted and humbled to embark upon directing regional transmission organizations and independent system operators to review their rules and business practice manuals to make sure that we were making room for energy storage, which quite frankly hadn't even come about at the time in commercial deployment in the RTO and regional context as it is today. So those were some of the building blocks, if you will. This iteration of FERC, I think it's a great display of bipartisanship where we can find it, has really moved the ball forward with Order 841. And to see the work happening in the space around energy storage is inspiring, it's exciting, but it's critical and it's fundamental in order to pair these resources and this technological advancement with clean energy. Now, it's interesting to see that there are 10% of the folks on that say they're not in clean energy. I would suggest if you are in the gas space, you're supporting this transition. Do we have to focus on decarbonization? Absolutely, and that includes folks in the gas sector. But this is a critical role that storage can play to really complement renewables projects, for instance, co-location projects. Maybe it's renewables and storage, maybe it's renewables, gas and storage, et cetera. But to really help us move further along in this transition, non-wires alternatives such as battery storage will be key. I also want to focus on supporting the clean energy integration work. This work requires a higher level of coordination than we've experienced, I would say, in the last 20 years in the sector. And so I don't like to use terms like traditional or baseload, but we have sources and resources which possess new and different attributes, which has required us to think differently about system planning and about integrated resource planning at the state level and at the regional level that really are required to move nimbly and flexibly as we are embarking on this dynamic transition. So that key is really critical. And what some of us say, it's kind of like not the sexiest thing, maybe, but for those of us who are nerds and geeks, we live for this. And to really think about what could be and to think about how load growth may or may not shift in portions of the state and regions, and also to really focus on the potential of our resources, what they are today, more importantly, what our technological advances could be tomorrow will be key. So the third point I'll mention on opportunities would be source and resource coordination. For a number of years in my tenure as both a state and federal regulator, we focused heavily on electric gas coordination. So this is really tying into my last point that I made regarding the supporting the integration. But we really need to focus like never before on what are the processes that need to be in place across energy and resource elements to strengthen this work. This is where we need system planners, engineers, where we need policy thinkers and folks who've been doing this work for such a long period of time. Now to evolve from gas electric coordination to a broader recognition of all of the sources and resources that we have to bear. Let me mention and close on a really key challenge for us in the US. Our friends across the pond reference this challenge as a bit of a patchwork. We continue to be challenged with federal-state coordination. And we see this showing up in the operation of wholesale electricity markets in the US. We see it showing up at the regional level. I've talked about that quite a bit. We also see it rearing its ugly head in the development of infrastructure. So it's critical that states and the federal government work better together. We've seen some examples of that. Quite frankly, there is so much more that we can do in this space to recognize that states are leading here and to integrate state policy into the federal policy framework. We see that quite a bit at the wholesale electricity market level. We also need to recognize that the federal government will be increasing now its policy development, and we need to recognize that as well and work well together, work better together, as we are all embarking on this mission together of supporting the clean energy transition today and tomorrow. So with that, Maria, I'll pause and I'll save my other comments for the Q&A. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Colette. So now we are going to turn to Jessika. Oh, I screwed up. Sue, are you next? Is that how we did it? Yes, I'm sorry. Sue, you're next. Gosh, pay attention, Maria.
I think you had it right, Maria, but I'm happy to run with it. So delighted to join you today. I'm Sue Reid, Principal Advisor for Finance with Mission 2020, and really appreciate Colette's remarks and Maria's opening, and for all of you joining us here today. It's such an important moment in time, really a potential inflection point in terms of this country's history in terms of energy choices and deployment. So I'd like to broaden out the lens, not at all to discount the really important work in terms of particular focus policies and developments on transmission with RTOs and so on. But I think all of us can get into our trenches, and it's good to be reminded in terms of some of the really big picture opportunities and transitions that are already starting to be underway. I will zing through the first one, which is to focus on the clean energy transition opportunity writ large in this decisive decade. Secondly, the incredible momentum and associated suite of opportunities around net zero emissions commitments. And thirdly, the opportunities to really upend the historic entrenched inequities in terms of the allocation of benefits and burdens of our energy decision making. And as I talk about each of those pieces, I will try to touch upon a couple of the systemic challenges that we need to confront, specifically including the need to shift mindsets. We've never had such a pace of change such as we're starting to experience and need to experience in the decade ahead. And so shifting mindsets is something we really need to focus on, and also addressing the persistent valuation gap. So the gap between the actual societal costs of energy choices from infrastructure to resources, and what we actually take into account with energy decision-making processes. So first, quickly on clean energy transition writ large, I'm probably preaching to the choir, but we have an incredible foundation right now to do exactly what scientists, policymakers, experts are telling us, and the Paris Agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement are telling us we have to do, which is to slash emissions across all sectors in half by the end of this decade and reach net zero before mid-century. So we have the proven technologies, wind, both land-based and offshore, solar, storage, electric vehicles, energy efficiency and conservation. Not only are they proven, and we have proven finance vehicles for directing capital toward their deployment, but they also are more cost competitive than ever before. They're out competing other resources, certainly wind and solar, across the spectrum, with storage and electric vehicles on a very similar trajectory. So we have the technologies, they are ever more cost competitive, consistently defying projections in terms of their competitive positioning in the marketplace. We also know the policies that are necessary for their deployment, and we seem to be moving past the era where, in most cases, where incentives are needed, that RPSs and RESs and feed-in tariffs have done their job to really build these markets and drive down costs such that now we can focus on policies, focus more on the very high level of signaling, this increasing swath of states that have set net zero or carbon free or 100% emissions free electric grids, to bring those dates forward, to expand those policies so we have the powerful drivers to really align the long-term planning, the medium-term planning and resource allocation accordingly. So we have this incredible foundation, the vast majority of tools that we need right now to bring our electric grid, our grids across the nation to zero emissions, even as we expand deployment of electricity to meet other energy needs, particularly including transportation and building heating. So all of this is buttressed by the second area of opportunities that I wanted to touch upon, which is this incredible momentum around alignment with net zero emissions. It was just 2 years ago that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with its special report on limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in that amount of time, when really the whole concept of net zero emissions alignment started to be introduced into public discourse and policymaking, private sector decision making, just 2 years, some of the biggest behemoths from a government and private sector perspective have already committed to net zero emissions by or before 2050 and are buttressing these commitments so that they go beyond rhetoric with interim targets and transition plans and so on. So with the incoming Biden-Harris administration, the entire G7, the largest economies in the world, will soon all be covered by net zero emissions by 2050 commitments. And the vast majority of the G20's emissions also will be subject to similar commitments, with China coming in around 2060, or at latest by 2060 for carbon neutrality. This is an extraordinary transition in the landscape from a policy perspective. And then we already have seen over 1,000 businesses globally commit to net zero emissions by, or in some cases well before 2050. And importantly, those who control the world's capital, the finance sector, already we're seeing significant movement. And just one example I'll put out there, and you'll see in the next couple of days some more movement. That's a minor teaser there, but just by way of one example, the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, which was just launched last year, now has over 30 asset owners in the mix. These are institutions that sit at the pinnacle of the finance food chain, have all committed to net zero emissions for their portfolios, for everything they finance and invest in before 2050. They've committed to interim targets for 2025 and 2030. They're working together on methodologies and metrics where the tools that they need to understand their emissions profiles and how to cut emissions don't exist. They're spurring development of those tools, and they're working on engaging the companies in their portfolios to commit to and actualize net zero emissions commitments. They're working with policymakers. They're working with other influential players in the landscape, including asset managers and investment consultants. So this is an all-in package of efforts from, in the case of the net zero asset owners, entities that control over 5 trillion in assets, including a handful that are located in North America. But it's a truly global effort and building out day by day. So incredible momentum around net zero. We need to, at the same time, because we're talking about a pace and scale of change on realignment, recalibration for net zero that the world has never seen. And so it'll be really important across the board, from long-term planning for energy systems to human resources planning in terms of the workforce that is needed to get us there. It will be a formidable challenge to shift mindsets across the board. We really need to get there, but the stage has been set in terms of high-level public policy commitments and private sector commitments as well in the follow-through. So that takes me to the third set of opportunities, that we cannot do this. We cannot get ourselves fully on track for achieving our climate objectives, for achieving and grabbing all the incredible opportunities and co-benefits of rapid transition to clean energy without really intentional and systematic focus on upending this long, dismaying history of disproportionate allocation of burdens of our energy choices, in particular in communities of color and low-income communities. We have reams now of data and information that lay out this history in terms of everything from power plant siting to long distance infrastructure to road configurations and impacts of tailpipe emissions, that this is an historic opportunity because we are changing things and need to change things so rapidly and so comprehensively, it's also an extraordinary, unprecedented opportunity to change those systems and turn them on their head. And it's impossible in the amount of time we have here to get into an exhaustive list, but I'll flag just 4 areas of focus in this regard. One is to ensure that environmental justice communities have real, meaningful representation at the table, empowered representation, whether it's the long-term big picture planning or individual compressor stations or power plants, whatever it may be. Absolutely crucial to ensure that that kind of decision-making becomes far more inclusive than it ever has been before. 2, we need to ensure access for everyone. We cannot leave anyone behind with this transition. We need to ensure that low-income communities have expansive access, in particular energy efficiency, energy conservation programs, electric vehicles, and renewables. There are some great examples. Massachusetts, for example, where I'm based, has made terrific inroads in this regard. We need to scale these programs and build them out. Third, we need to address the valuation gap that I mentioned earlier, this failure to internalize the externalities, this putting onto different ledgers the actual societal costs, particularly public health costs, climate costs of our energy choices. We know how to do this now. There's some terrific analyses and experts that can guide us through this, but we need to really rationalize our decision-making, even as some of the market distortions like fossil fuel subsidies are phased out. So we really create a level playing field and bridge this valuation gap. And last but not least, we need to very intentionally and systematically attend to a just transition across the board. And a cookie cutter approach will not work. The approaches that are needed to, for example, address the unique concerns of a near retirement coal miner are quite different from an entry-level oil and gas finance individual. That across the board, we need to very intentionally figure out what this transition and envision what this transition looks like and how to attend to whether it's retraining needs or other needs around building resilience. And it may sound a little bit funny for someone like me who comes from a finance perspective working with investors to focus on just transition and this equitable equation as I've just tried to do. But investors clearly understand and are trying to send a stronger signal every day about the importance of just transition and their shared understanding that we can't get to enduring, resilient, economically viable systems that work for humanity unless we attend to these core issues at the center of the mix. So delighted to join you today. Really welcome your questions and really look forward to working with you on this great journey ahead.
Thanks, Sue. We really appreciate your remarks, and you guys the audience can already tell why you all are panelists. You're doing a great job. Before I turn the screen over to Jessika, I want to remind folks that have joined us today through the webinar to ask questions. So after Jessica's remarks, we will have questions and we'll take your thoughts and questions, and the panelists will respond to those. So please use your type in your question below the live stream window. If you would do that, that would be great. I know the panelists are dying to hear from you, so please do feel free to ask a question and we'll get to those. And we'll talk a little bit about the results of what everyone thought the challenge would be in the next 5 years, right after Jessika's remark. So Jessika, thank you for your patience. Thanks for being flexible. And again, this is Jessika Trancik. She's an associate professor of the Institute of Data, Systems, and Society at MIT. Jessika, it's all yours.
All right, great. Thanks, Maria. And it's just such a great pleasure to be on this panel. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So my name is Jessika Trancik, and my work is on using data-informed models to help accelerate clean energy innovation and emissions reductions in order to meet climate targets. And I would say that one of our greatest challenges in addressing climate change is to find ways to accelerate clean energy innovation. As many of you know, climate policy has been uneven at best, and we've lost valuable time. And I'd say one result of this is that it's now extra important that we find ways to use our resources wisely to accelerate clean energy innovation. And accelerating innovation here means accelerating the improvement and the adoption of technology and infrastructure. That's how I'm using that word. And technology and infrastructure in these remarks includes more than just hardware. It's not just physical technologies, it also includes software, business models, and other non-physical, non-hardware technologies, which I'll come to. Okay, so you may have heard this phrase in other contexts as well, that we want to accelerate clean energy innovation. It sounds nice and catchy, but how can we actually do this in practice? And I'd argue that first and foremost, we need to be more intentional in how we're investing time and money, these valuable resources of time and money in innovation. The idea is to make these limited resources, they're always inevitably limited, stretch further and do more faster so that we can reach those climate policy targets. To be more intentional, we need to do things differently than we've done before, I would argue. We need to understand the process of technology innovation and find the most effective nudges that policymakers, private investors, and engineers can implement. And luckily, our knowledge in this field is advancing. This is what I've dedicated my career to. We're learning from past successes and failures, and I'll show you what I mean through some specific examples from my group's recent research, the Trancik lab at MIT. And again, the idea is we want to find those nudges, given that there's no central planner in the world. You know, there's no single person that can say, you know, we're here at point A, we want to get to point B, so I'm going to decide that this is what's going to happen. No, instead, we need to find the ways that, you know, actual people can nudge the system forward, those three kinds of decision makers that I just mentioned. So let me give go through some recent research insights on how we can be more intentional. And I want to first start with one of the most famous examples of clean energy innovation, which is this precipitous, this rapid, substantial cost decline that we've seen in solar energy. Solar energy costs have fallen by 99% over the last 4 decades. And given the poll results, you know, 40% of you have seen a lot of this cost decline in real time. And it's one example that's often held up as, you know, a gold standard success story in clean energy innovation. But where did it come from? If we can understand where it came from, we could potentially repeat this for other technologies. So we looked at this in a recent research paper that really took a couple of decades, in fact, to arrive at. But where we implemented a new modeling approach and new theory that allowed us to pin down the innovation drivers at different levels, starting from the device physics to company strategies and economies of scale and government policy. I don't have time to go through the details, but one of the most important findings from this research was about the essential but different roles that 2 key types of government policy instruments played. These were policies to fund research and those that stimulated markets. And this finding showed that they were both essential. They played very different roles. And this helps to address a longstanding debate in this area about the role of these market stimulating policies and whether they're needed. I would say they are. We estimate that 60% of that cost decline in solar energy came from market expansion policies. These are things like feed-in tariffs, renewable portfolio standards. They could include carbon prices in the future, depending on the price and how these are set up. And about 30% of that cost decline came from government funding for research. But it wasn't just about government policy. These policies jump-started a huge process of competition in industry and lots of groundbreaking research on solar energy. And each of these contributions added up to what's this massive success story. It's a story, I would say, about what are still many unsung heroes. And the evidence that we see is that it's definitely not a story about a few great men. So looking forward, can we achieve similar successes in other technologies? And we know that these same policy instruments could be applied to other technologies, though what we learned through this research, what we're learning is that that balance of instruments should be different for different technologies depending on their characteristics and stages of development. We've looked at a whole suite of different technologies. I'll just share a couple of examples. So if we take nuclear fission, for example, here the trends and costs couldn't be more different than for solar. Many of you may know that the costs have been increasing in the US for nuclear fission construction. And when we apply that mechanistic modeling approach I noted before, as we did in this paper that came out just a few weeks ago, we uncover a set of priorities that are specific to nuclear. Here we see that a key priority area for research and development funding and also field demonstrations, that's really important, is to come up with designs that can be more robust to variable construction conditions. We can use that mechanistic modeling to do that, to increase our intentionality, be more intentional, and thereby address the ballooning construction costs, which are primarily soft costs, non-hardware related costs that have led to the cost increasing trends. When we look at lithium-ion battery technologies and other battery technologies, we can similarly uncover priorities. And these include ways to accelerate cost reductions and ensure scalable materials-based industries. We can look at a whole suite of different technologies. Now, in addition to understanding the process, it's important to measure progress. And this means measuring progress in individual technologies against energy system-wide goals. When we do this for electric vehicles, we learn about how to best roll out charging strategies to meet people's needs, or for grid scale energy storage, we learn by how much more the costs have to decrease. And this process involves considering energy consuming behaviors, fluctuations in the energy supply, physical limitations of technology. So again, it's using engineering, mathematical models, knowledge of economics and policy. And this allows us to put quantitative targets out there that many people can work toward in order to accelerate innovation. Now, measuring progress, and this touches on something that Sue said as well, means looking at the distribution of benefits and costs. We have to do much, much better to accelerate innovation that benefits all communities, especially those that are currently underserved, through the growth in high quality and sustained jobs and in local industries. Innovation can help with that. So the bottom line here is that I believe we can be more intentional in our investments in order to accelerate innovation in clean energy. To do this, we can apply this blueprint I briefly outlined to find the best nudges and to measure progress. And we also need to use portfolio approaches to manage uncertainty. The future is always uncertain, but we can do better than a random guess about which innovation strategies to focus on. Now, just briefly, let me talk through some of the results of applying this blueprint to two promising areas of innovation. The first is opportunities, the first kind of set of opportunities that I see when we apply this blueprint. Opportunities for innovation in specific technologies include opportunities in soft technology. This includes software and business models. So it's not all about hardware. We need to think about new business models for electric vehicle charging, vehicle sharing, smart algorithms to address grid impacts. Artificial intelligence really has to be harnessed and shaped toward beneficial outcomes. And new kinds of demand management can potentially act as long duration energy storage. Finally, inadequate access to solar energy systems, energy efficient homes, and many other energy services in many communities is also a major gap in soft technology. Now, just briefly in terms of hardware, some of these examples were mentioned by other panelists, including Colette and Sue. So I'll go over these real quickly, but one of the main opportunities is in low cost, ultra duration energy storage, including new battery chemistries and materials, low carbon fuels, including hydrogen, ammonia, tailored biofuels, but really managing the negative impacts, but potentially looking into these and other options for jet fuels, and other difficult to decarbonize energy services. There's a need to focus on certain key hardware priorities there. Negative emissions technologies are also worth looking at as an element of a portfolio, but we must recognize that we've been very bad at managing processes requiring a lot of coordination, I would say, in many cases in the past. We need to be wary of that with those technologies. So to summarize the three opportunities I highlighted, first I talked about how we can be more intentional using models, data, and knowledge of technology innovation in our investments of time and money in order to accelerate key innovations. Second, I talked about opportunities in non-hardware technology, like business models and software. And third, I discussed key opportunities in hardware and physical technology development. And I only had time to highlight a few examples, but this set can be and should be, and we are expanding this into a complete transition map with different climate solutions and portfolios of policies and technologies slotted in. And I'll just end with a statement that it's my belief that this quest to accelerate clean energy innovation is now very doable, given recent progress in technologies and new research insight that we have on technology innovation. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, Jessika. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all the panelists' thoughtful remarks and comments. And before we turn it over to Q&A, we're getting a lot of great questions. It's going to be impossible to get to them all. But we're going to try and get to some. So before we get there, though, I thought it would just be interesting now to go back to the question we asked at the very beginning of you, the audience. What are the big challenges that you see over the next 5 years in clean energy? And as many of you can probably see, it's also been interesting to watch as people type in remarks and their answers, how these have changed over time. Energy storage was a clear winner early on. Energy storage, as more and more people contributed their thoughts, ensuring equity and access is another, probably the two biggest and most popular responses, if you will. Energy storage and equity and access are two very common challenges that people raised. People also, and what's been great is the panelists, you all have, without knowing that the audience was going to sort of submit these, you all touched upon these, which is great, which really tells you that those are part of the framing of the issues that we're going to have to deal with as we move forward today and tomorrow. Other challenges people raise are price competitiveness, fossil fuel opposition, equity, cost, lack of investment, finance priorities, and intermittency. So thank you, audience, for submitting those. And panelists, all three of you, I think, touched on most, if not all of those. So I think when you think about your answers to questions, if you didn't include one of those on purpose, that might be something you want to talk about. So audience, thank you for your questions. I know that the panelists might have questions for each other. And I know, Colette, you let me know you might want to ask your fellow panelists a question. So I'll turn over to you in a minute. But I think let's just start with a fun one that someone submitted in the question box. And in the spirit of trying to get through all these questions quickly, if the panelists can be very quick as you can in your response, because I've got a long list of questions that people want you to answer. So Colette, you're next, but my first question to the panel is, what books on clean energy or the climate crisis do you recommend that people read? So I will turn that over to you, to my panelists. People just jump in.
I would say read the Federal Power Act. That's where I would start, because this work is so vast and it really requires us to understand what governs. So from my previous experience, I would say that. And Maria, I want to hear from the audience, so I don't have to ask my question. I'm eager to hear from the audience. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we can do that. Jessika or Sue, do you want to chime in? Any good books on clean energy and climate that you would recommend to folks that have joined us today?
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Jess.
Go ahead, Sue, please.
I'm happy to chime in, and it's probably not what you would expect. And I will admit to a little bit of bias because this book was co-authored by my boss, Christiana Figueres, who used to run the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. But she and Tom Ribbett-Kernack wrote The Future We Choose. And it lays out both the dystopian reality that we could be propelling ourselves toward if climate change remains unchecked, but alternatively, what an affirmative, beautiful vision of the future can look like. And I think it brings into stark relief the choices that we're facing. And I think it's extraordinarily helpful for people to envision our landing point, what we're working toward, so you can work backward to figure out all of the steps we need to take. So The Future We Choose by Christiana Figueres.
Yeah, so if I could just jump in, you know, one topic that hasn't come up, but I think is really important, so that's part of why I want to mention this book, is, you know, this question of, you know, it's not just, I mean, I focus on innovation, but it's not just about bringing new industries in, new technologies, new services, but it's also about, you know, that word, our word, regulation, and existing industries, and really, you know, bringing them into the transition process, but also holding them to task. And so I want to call out books by my colleague Naomi Oreskes at Harvard, Merchants of Doubt. You know, also Why Trust Science, I think, is such a great book for this time. And so that's also by Naomi Oreskes. So I'll call that one out as well.
The audience, you can see why these are panelists. I was furiously writing those down because they're all good recommendations. So thank you, thank you. Okay, another question for the panel. Someone asked, how can we get more young people in the clean energy workforce? Lots of issues, lots of challenges. So, and we need all hands on deck. So that's a question from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say, like, the future I would like to see is one where we're just, you know, making science more accessible to young people in general, and addressing clean energy and global warming as a part of that. Every time I speak to kids, they ask the best questions, I have to say, and they become extremely committed to these topics. But I just feel we're not, you know, and it's true, we're not giving people that entry into science, everybody. You know, we really need all of the good minds, all of the good ideas. And so really focusing on education and giving people that entry point, making them feel like they have something to contribute to science, you know, even if it may, you know, they're coming from backgrounds, they may not see people that look like them necessarily among the great scientists that they're learning about. I mean, there are a diverse set of great scientists that, you know, historians are uncovering over time, but I think that's really important. So bringing more people into science.
Great. Sue
I
or Colette?
agree. I would say we need their energy. We are embarking upon a time of innovation that is unlike anything, I hope, we've seen in recent times, which requires us to think differently and to act and implement differently than we ever have before. And like Jessika, I love talking to, especially in my time as a regulator, and it continues to this day, engaging with bright minds and young people that think differently about the ways we tackle challenging problems. When I was a new regulator, I would say, why do we do it that way? It's things that seemed odd. We need that. We need to be challenged in a healthy way, as Jessika also said. We also know that this generation and the one that follows will be much more committed to the recognition that we have to act to impact climate change and to eradicate the human impacts on our environment and our world. And it's this generation that will help us do it. I'm convinced of that.
I completely agree with that. And the landscape of opportunity on clean energy has never been better. You know, I cut my teeth in the early stages of my career as an intellectual property law attorney, and I might still be a practicing IP lawyer had there been opportunities to form a clean energy, a tech practice. But back then, and I'm showing my age here, back then, those opportunities did not exist. Now there are massive law firms with entire boutique clean energy, clean tech practices. And this is true whether your skill sets and wiring are well matched with law or finance or engineering or whatever it may be. The landscape of opportunity keeps expanding. And I would say one thing that we can do and should do is, with further investments with COVID recovery, heed the advice of leading global economists like Joe Stiglitz and Sir Nicholas Stern, and the International Energy Agency, which hardly has historically been at the vanguard of really pushing clean energy transition. But its sustainable recovery report that it put out last summer really prioritized the need and benefits to invest and prioritize COVID recovery resources in energy efficiency, weatherizing existing building stock, building more resilient grids, deploying renewables. In this way, we can really maximize job creation while we're also propelling ourselves forward on clean energy transition.
Amen. And Maria, if I could also add on to what Sue just said, because I loved Sue's comments about equity and access. So I want to just build upon what Sue just said about how do we do that? We can use this intentional work to bring in young people, to bring in, no matter what you want to do in life, you can do it in the energy sector. And that's why I love talking to students, but really focusing on equity in this space. And how do we, in a nation where we are evolving in terms of the workers that we have, how can we then include diverse people, low-income folks from the other side of the tracks to help us make this transition in terms of workforce and training, especially in the clean energy space. So it's a world that's for everyone, but I think the young folks will be leading us here.
Thank you all. I agree with you. And I just want to chime in. One other question we got was, how do you encourage people to stay focused and interested in clean energy, given all the COVID world, right, that we're living in now, and the lack of jobs in some ways? So Sue, I was excited to hear you talk about, as we think about getting out of COVID and COVID recovery and what we can do. I think, one of the things we need to tell folks is hang on. There are opportunities, and I'd love it if you guys want to address any of those or be thinking about that as you answer some other questions as we continue. Sue, I'm going to ask you a question. Someone specifically was glad to hear you mention internalizing externalities, reducing the tragedy of the commons to show the true cost of energy. It says, can she share the tools that she mentioned? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and the toolkit is still being developed, right? And EPA, among others, have done some work on putting a value, the social cost of carbon, so to speak. That's a start. But throughout all these, the PUC proceedings where individual permitting decisions are made to the highest levels of EPA and CEQ and so on, we need to systematize this, right? And we've had entire convenings with some of the leading experts on climate finance this year to troubleshoot around it. There is a concerted effort to figure out how we bridge the valuation gap across the board. It is a global issue. It is not at all unique to the United States or any individual state. I wish I could say we had all the answers, but we definitely have the tools. We have the economic analysis like never before to understand the whole value chain costs of different energy choices and then to bring them into the systems. But we're going to need some regulatory and policy reforms to enable and demand that all the different decision-making entities from local to state to federal level all are moved in this direction through overarching requirements.
Great, thank you. Colette or Jessika, you guys want to chime in? Or
I'll quickly say, because that was a question for Sue.
I was going to say, but you have.
We worked really hard to streamline our comments, and they all are complimentary. I want to say to those who are interested, take a look at the work at EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, because following up on Sue's point, when we think about what's technically and technologically feasible, Jessika, by the way, I loved your infrastructure discussion on software. So if you go to the EPRI side and focus on artificial intelligence, for instance, we're seeing this strong intersection between how we're leveraging these new discoveries to, for instance, support broader resilience and reliability through AI, data analytics, and machine learning. And so we're just on the cusp of some really amazing stuff in the sector, but the best is yet to come.
Awesome. Thanks, Colette. Okay, now we're going to pivot a little bit with this question. One of the questions we got is, who is working with clean energy in big agriculture? Anybody want to take that on? And maybe how important that is?
I mean, I'm not working directly in that area, but I can say that it is extremely important. And it's an area where, you know, I would like to see this intentional technology innovation process involving all of the different stakeholders. So sort of the way I see this happening is that, you know, we can bring in policymakers and all of the, you know, farmers and all along the supply chain for agriculture. And there are many tools that can be implemented, but many of them are these soft technology tools that I was talking about. And so we'll have to put some extra effort into coordinating, uncovering those fixes. There's no quick, you know, hardware manufacturable fix as such. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And Maria, I did want to say a couple of things about the recovery. Is this a good time to do that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly, I mean, I think this question about recovery and, you know, recovery from COVID, it's, you know, it's not just about recovery. It is really about getting to a better place. And anytime we're talking about change, there's an opportunity to do things differently. This clean energy transition has to happen quickly. It has to involve many people. There's a lot of opportunity for local innovation in these soft technologies that I mentioned, job creation, which is high quality, you know, sustained job creation, and in the meantime, accelerating emissions reductions. It sounds like a lot to do all in one package, but I think it is very doable. But it's not going to happen on its own. So traditionally, I feel like with technology, we haven't done as much as we can to harness it toward the directions that will benefit society. I think we're ready to do that. And this is a great opportunity to put some of those, you know, theories and sort of blueprints and best practices to the test.
And if I could add on the... Sorry.
Go ahead, Sue, and then Colette, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry. On moving big agriculture. So investors have been really engaged in this space as well. I think the reason why I paused is because first and foremost, investors have been engaging large agricultural and food and beverage companies to move them into alignment with net zero emissions, and have made tremendous inroads with companies like Archer Daniels Midland and Cargill and companies like Nestle, which committed last year to net zero emissions by 2050. First and foremost, the priority has been on curbing deforestation. Unsurprisingly, but you know, the commitments writ large have to entail changes in soil carbon management and, of course, energy systems. So a holistic approach ultimately will be taken. And this is a little bit of a bank shot because it's investor pressure on the companies, but it's very real and beginning to deliver impact.
Wonderful. Colette, you want to close this out?
Thank you. I was going to add on about big ag too. Thanks for the question. Being a Southern girl, I think agriculture has a critical role to play here. We've seen it evolve over the decades, you know, energy efficiency efforts. Now we've seen a much greater focus on biomass, but the thing that gives me the greatest hope in this sector is renewable natural gas. So who knew that all of the things happening in agriculture on farms can really help support this clean energy transition? Renewable natural gas is going to be a critical complementary element to distribution gas systems. And so I think that's a key area to watch. And I'm really hopeful about the potential and the way to take that waste and help to transform not only the energy delivery sector, transportation as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all. we have a session that is supposed to end in 1 minute. So I just want to take the last 30 seconds and thank Colette and Sue and Jessika for being here. Thanks to the audience for joining. It really was great to have you engage with this panel with your questions, with your feedback, telling us who you are. So we really, really appreciate all of you being here today. I know there's another panel as part of the symposium this afternoon. We're hoping folks are able to join us for that one as well. And again, on behalf of the Department of Energy, as well as the university sponsors of C3E, we want to thank the panelists and all of you for being here today. And with that, I'll close out this panel and wish everyone a great afternoon. Thanks so much.